hymn written by Ralph Vaughan Williams, and it's entitled "Come My Way, My Truth, My Life."
Thank you, Bruce. That was beautiful. Good morning and welcome to the Treasure Coast Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Stuart, Florida. Today is September 20th, 2020. My name is Regina and I will be your worship associate. We want to give thanks to everyone who helped with this service, and that would be Bruce Ruby, our music director, Karen Frank, our Zoom host, and Karina Poloni and Janet Rader, who are backup hosts and worship associates in case we have any technical issues, which we hope we won't have. We are welcoming congregation. We welcome people of all gender identities, races, ages, and backgrounds. Thank you for being with us today. We are holding Zoom services every Sunday at 11 a.m. A link to the Sunday service can be found in our Friday online newsletter, which also has our weekly announcements. To be put on the online mailing list, if you're not already on there, or to find out more information about us, go to our website at tcuuc.org. If you would like to make a donation, there's also a link on the website. Any support is appreciated. Even though we're not meeting in person, we still have expenses that need to be met. If you'd like to send a check, our address is 21 Southeast Central Parkway, Stuart, Florida. And today we have a special guest with us. Her name is, guest speaker, her name is Rev Ranwa Hammamy. She serves as the executive director of the UU Justice Ministry of California. And this is an organization that supports UUs around the state of California in their various justice ministries. And they provide advocacy, education, and witness opportunities to live out UU lives. She is a self-described UU Muslim and seeks to serve both living traditions in her ministry, encouraging others to both grow and learn from each other's gifts. And now we will have the chalice lighting. Let the lighting of this flame kindle within us a blaze of hope, strengthening us for the path ahead. May it guide our feet to take us where we are needed, our hands to work for justice, our minds to know our interconnectedness, and our hearts to loving kindness for all. Today, our opening words will honor the life of an incredible woman, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who sadly died on Friday. Throughout her long career, she passionately fought for gender equality, equal justice, and eliminating all kinds of discrimination. Ginsburg personally experienced gender discrimination as she attended college and became a lawyer in the 1950s. We've all heard the story of the dean of Harvard Law School in 1956 asking the 9 women students why they were occupying seats that should be filled by men. But Ginsburg went on to be an exceptional student, making the Harvard Law Review and on to Columbia, tying for first place in her class. Despite these accomplishments, she still had trouble finding a job after graduation. But that did not deter the indomitable RBG. She went on to, among other things, serve as Women's Rights Project at the ACLU, was appointed by President Carter to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, and served for the past 27 years as a distinguished United States Supreme Court Justice. Well, we all know by now her history, but as a justice and lawyer, it was her words that helped bring about some important changes in American life. I would like to share with you some advice she gave that is relevant to us today. She encouraged people to fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that leads others to join you. To those who are impatient for change, she said, real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time. As we struggle to make sense of our world, to take action and do the right thing, she has some practical advice. Don't be distracted by emotions like anger, envy, resentment. These just zap energy and waste time. For all of us in these difficult times, hopeful words. She said, so often in life, things that you regard as an impediment turn out to be great, good fortune. And when asked what she considered a meaningful life, she said, to make life a little better for people less fortunate than you. That's what I think a meaningful life is. One lives not just for oneself, but for one's community, which she certainly did. And we will pause and have a moment of silence for Justice Ginsburg. And now Bruce will play and sing the hymn 1017, Building a New Way.
Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without peace, our world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry.
Let us recite the affirmation, speaking the first verse and singing the second. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now, Bruce.
From all that dwell below the stars, let songs of faith in love rise. Where you hear truth and goodness sung, from every land, by every tongue.
Now our story for all ages will be Reverend Hammamy, who will read What Side Are You On?
Our story for all ages is Which Side Are You On? The Story of a Song, written by George L. Lyon with artwork by Christopher Cardinale.
Thank you. Thank you for that interesting story. Now we will have, let us share our joys and sorrows. We have a symbolic river of joys and sorrows. And for each joy and sorrow, I will put a stone for each joy and sorrow. All right, so once again, know that all of your joys and sorrows are in our hearts, and we thank you for sharing them. Now, Reverend Hammamy will do the pastoral meditation.
I invite all of you to take a moment, find yourselves in your body, however that may be, whether it's by breathing, stretching, embroidering, however you can find yourself present to yourself in this moment. And I invite you into this time of prayer, reflection, meditation, whatever feels right for you in this moment, with a song meditation. Will you sit with me? Will you sit with me? Just for a little while. I know there's a world we're fighting for. Comrade, I am hurting. Comrade, I am hurting. Just for a little while. I know there's a world we're fighting for. I'm not running away. No, I'm not giving up hope. But I am feeling tired. Just for a little while. I know there's a world we're fighting for. Comrade, hold my hand. Amen. Remind me just for a little while. I know there's a world worth fighting for. Just for a little while. I know there's a world worth fighting for. I invite all of us to take a moment in silent reflection, sitting with one another, imagining together that world we are fighting for amidst all that we are fighting for. Our reading this morning comes from the poet Moja Goff and her collection Hagar Poems. Our reading is called Hagar Writes a Letter to Sarah as a Cathartic Exercise Suggested by Her Therapist. Dear Sarah, life made us enemies, but it doesn't have to be that way. What if we both ditched the old man? He could have visitation rights with the boys, alternate weekends and holidays, especially the Feast of the Sacrifice. He took that day anyway, forgetting it was about me in the desert, watching my baby dehydrate near to death. Anyhow, you and I, we'd set up house, raise the kids, start a catering business maybe. You have brains, so do I. We could travel. There are places to see besides Ura and this nowheresville desert with its tribes of hooligans. No, your lips thin when you disapprove, like the mother I almost remember, before I wound up in your house. I was barely more than a girl. You used to laugh then. In those days, you could stand to look at me. We even hugged sometimes. Oh, Sarah, you need years of therapy. Can't you just admit that what he did was wrong? Be angry at him for just 1 second. You don't have to be angry forever, just long enough to know that the world won't fall apart. Long enough to pity him, yourself, me. Laugh, Sarah, laugh. Imagine God, the possibility. Sincerely, love. Haja. Welcome to the apocalypse. I cannot count how many times I've heard or even said these words as a humorous attempt to wrap my head around all that has happened in just the last 6 months. And I don't know about you, but some days calling 2020 this moment in history an apocalypse, a reckoning, it feels right about now. The more I sit with this idea, a great reckoning, the more it makes sense. The combination of multiple catastrophes coming to a head, our humanity-driven climate crisis that has led to fires, a devastating fire season along the West Coast where I am right now. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated by inequitable healthcare systems and reprehensible lives, hitting very close to home for some of us. And the centuries-long, systemically backed racist violence against Black and brown lives in this country, it has all brought to our mainstream attention just how much we as a society and we as a world desperately need to acknowledge and address. These days, it can also feel that much harder with the loss of recent figures of hope and resilience, like Chadwick Boseman, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And for some of us, this grief, this anguish, these realities have long been a part of our awareness, if not our own lived experience. And now for all of us, these realities are undeniable and at the forefront of our lives and our futures. As part of this reckoning, our leaders, our institutions, our societies, all of us are being called once again to acknowledge essential and challenging truths about our past and the devastating impact they have on our lives in the present and the future. These last 6, 7, 8, 9 months, we as a society have received an abundance of invitations, and frankly, sometimes with more patience than we have earned. We have received an abundance of invitations to re-examine the stories we tell, the narratives we glorify and memorialize, and to learn new stories that can help guide us on a new way. We as a society have received an abundance of invitations to expand our collective awareness and listen to and center experiences, histories, and stories that have been denied through tone policing, erasure, and genocide. And those are harsh words, but they are true ones. There are sides to our collective story, the story of our world, our country, our humanity, that have for too long gone unacknowledged. And in this reckoning, in this version of an apocalypse, we are being invited to do the hard work of learning new stories so that we can begin to undo and heal from the harm our old stories continue to cause. And to do this learning and healing work, to do this holy, sacred, soul recovery work, we as a society and as a faith tradition must commit ourselves to listening to and amplifying stories and experiences that have not been historically centered or told. We all need to come to an understanding that the majority narrative that many of us grew up in, it doesn't tell the whole story. But there are more perspectives out there that complexify and expand our collective narrative. And that, in this moment, is so essential to our survival. Because when we open ourselves up to those truths that have sometimes been whispered and more recently screaming to be heard, we open ourselves up to not only an understanding of the suffering and the harm and tragedy they bring to our collective story, we also open ourselves up to the wisdom, the faith, perseverance, creativity, and possibility they weave into our shared narrative. We expand our collective story, not only in our telling of our past, but in our imagining of our future. And so today, I would like to invite you into a story that isn't often centered or told, but is one I think we can learn from. In much of Western and particularly American discourse on the Islamic traditions, there is an almost exclusive focus on the role of the Prophet Muhammad. And that makes sense. His teachings are central to virtually all interpretations of the Islamic traditions. And when we talk about the Islamic traditions in interfaith context, it's often grouped together as one of the Abrahamic faiths, alongside Judaism and Christianity, as all of them have some version of the Abraham stories in their sacred texts. And yes, we can absolutely learn a lot from the stories of Abraham and Muhammad in the Islamic traditions. If we meet again, virtually or in person in the future, I will unabashedly gush over Muhammad's community organizing among the poorest residents of Mecca as part of his faithful work to create economic justice. But as important as those stories are, they don't tell the whole picture. And to begin expanding the collective story, to do essential learning, healing, and growing work that we need, especially in these times, we need to listen to and learn from a perspective that honestly doesn't often get told. And that is the perspective of a woman who has been described as anywhere from a slave to a nursemaid to one of Abraham's wives, Hagar, or Hajar. In many Judeo-Christian contexts, Hajar or Hagar is more often than not described through the lens of her relationship with Abraham and the ways in which she and their child were presented as tests of his faith. But she is much, 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 much more than that. A reality that Black womanist theologians and the Christian traditions like Dolores Williams have been lifting up for several generations, and what Muslima feminist theologians have also described as they engaged with the Islamic tradition. Now, as the majority narratives around Hajar in the Islamic traditions go, she was somewhere along the lines of a servant turned wife surrogate for Sarah when Sarah was unable to conceive a child with Abraham or Ibrahim. Now, there are complexities to that piece of her story alone, but that's for another conversation. As in the Judeo-Christian tellings of Hagar's story, Hajar was the first of Ibrahim's wives to have a child, a boy named Ishmael. And as in Judeo-Christian stories, the birth of Hajar's son is said to have caused Sarah some jealousy, no doubt because they were both living in a patriarchal time where the ability to bear children was tied to a woman's worth. Now, as the common story goes, Ibrahim was aware of this tension, but he struggled with what to do with the mess he had created. It is said that one night he was told by God to bring Hajar and their son Ishmael to a barren spot in the desert and leave them there with just a bit of water and some dates. When Ibrahim turned to leave Hajar and her son, Hajar asked him repeatedly, "Why are you leaving us here? Why are you leaving us here?" And every single time, he did not respond. It was only when Hajar asked him, "Did God tell you to bring us here?" did Ibrahim answer with a simple yes. Hajar then responded, "Then go. God will protect us." Eventually, the little bit of water and dates that Hajar had with her ran out, and soon she could no longer provide milk for her infant son. I cannot imagine what she felt like in that moment, thirsty, hungry, with her young child wailing in her arms. Nothing and no one around her but arid desert. But what happens next in the story does tell me a little bit about what she might have been thinking when she said, "Then go, God will protect us." Hajar began to search for water in the desert. She placed her child on the ground and began running back and forth, searching between two large hills in the area, searching for any sign of water or nourishment that would help her and her baby survive. She was desperate and she was determined. And eventually, an angel appeared and told her that her faith in God will be rewarded, and shows her a spring of fresh water flowing right next to her infant son's heel. Now, what Hajar did in that moment of discovery demonstrates her imagination, her creativity, and her foresight. She not only drank from that spring of water and shared it with her child, she created a well around that spring. And she knew what she was doing. She was preserving its presence and maintaining access to its life force, and not just for her. Hajar lived in a nomadic world. And so she knew that when travelers would eventually pass through her little spot of the desert, she would be able to trade water for more food and supplies to survive in that previously desolate spot. And that is exactly what happened in her story. Hajar and her son Ishmael not only survived because of her perseverance and creativity, they thrived. Travelers not only passed through this place, some of them stayed, and a town, an entire city grew around them. A city that began when one woman, one single mother, acted, created, and imagined in spite of the odds she was facing, motivated by her firmly held faith in the promise of God's protection. A city grew around her where every year, today, participants in a holy pilgrimage reenact her search for water in the desert to honor her faith. The name of that city, some of you may have figured out, is Mecca. Now, none of us were there when Ibrahim left Hajar and her son in the desert, but what I like to imagine is that Hajar embodied an attitude of grief, of anger, of resilience that was captured by the poem by Moja Koff today. The moment she found out that Ibrahim believed that God told him to leave a woman and her child alone in the desert, I love her reaction to that being the equivalent of, boy, bye. I am better off without you, and I know I've got something better looking out for me too. I imagine that in the middle of the fear and confusion of being left to potentially die in that desert, she is unapologetic in her anger at how Ibrahim treated her and says, then go. Knowing that there is a promise of protection waiting that deep down she knows she is worthy of. And Hajar didn't just wait for that promise of protection. Her belief that God would protect her and her infant son did not cause Hajar to become a passive victim waiting to be saved in these circumstances. Instead, she believed in that promise, and it moved her to do the opposite. She took action, rooted in her anger, rooted in her faith, rooted in her awareness of the danger she was facing, and in her ingenuity, knowing that to experience that promise of protection, she had a part to play in helping to create it. Her faith didn't tell her to wait. Her faith told her to act. Her faith told her that she herself was integral to that promise of protection. And in her decision to claim her part, her power, she not only finds the water to survive a day or two, she uses that water to create tools and strategy that she needs to survive and thrive in the desert. She innovates. She provides for herself and her son. She makes connections and builds a mutually supportive community in the desert that not only allows herself, but many more to eventually call this desolate spot home. When Hajar told Abraham to go because God would protect her and her child, she wasn't a woman submitting to abandonment. She was a woman who chose to help make a promise real by living into her greatest capacities for resilience, creativity, imagination, and hope. I like to believe, however much of this story feels true, feels metaphorical, I like to believe that this part of Hajar's story adds to our collective story about our potential as people and as communities. Hajar is a woman in a patriarchal society left stranded in the desert with her child, a promise, her faith, and her creative power. And that is a power that resides within each and every one of us, to imagine, to persevere, and create, not just to survive, but to thrive together. Those gifts, they are ones that we can demonstrate or surprise ourselves with every day, whether it's by trying out Zoom for the very first time this morning, or by suddenly having to manage a full-time job while also suddenly homeschooling your beloved children. See, our faith affirms our individual, free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And I believe that inherent to that affirmation is a promise of our innate, creative, and resilient potential. Accessing that potential, strengthening and growing that potential, it is an act that needs to happen in community. Hajar's story, her creativity, her ingenuity, her power, it wasn't simply shown by her running between the two hills herself and creating a makeshift well. The promise she believed in came into full fruition when she collaborated with others to make it so. She did not go from surviving to thriving on her own. She did so in community with others who helped make a promise of protection come true for all of them. That, to me, sounds like the universal salvation that our universalist predecessors imagined. A universal salvation that says everyone can experience the promise of an abundant love created here on earth. Created here on earth with our own hands and our hearts. So what does any of that have to do with us today, in this day of complex grief, fear, worry, possibility? Knowing her story, opening ourselves up to her perspective complexifies our story today, our own story of reckoning, our own story of possibility. And our reading in this poem by Moja Kaf imagines Hajar as going even one more step further in her creativity and resilience. She imagines that promise that Hajar imagined, a better world, not just for her, but for Sarah and their boys. In this imagining of Hajar's perspective as today, we not only see her believing in the promise of a better world, but believing in a path to it. And inviting Sarah, despite their broken relationship, to join her. Hajar even believes in a path for Ibrahim to be part of that better world for them. Out of pain and anger, Hajar still knows it doesn't have to be that way. Hajar writes this letter to Sarah and their circumstances, naming both truths that challenge and possibilities that invite. What if we both ditched the old man? We could travel. You don't have to be angry forever, just long enough to know the world won't fall apart. Imagine God, the possibility. Imagine us making God's promise come true. See, that's the part of the story that almost always doesn't get told. And that is the story we need today. The imagination, the possibility, the promise of water in the desert that we will miss if we hold too tight to the old stories. But if we let something new in, if we open ourselves up to searching for something, then maybe we will find that water that is calling to us all along. And in this year's reckoning, in this year's apocalypse, Hajar is writing this letter to all of us who have always felt some inkling that something is wrong, but unsure of what we can do about it. We are being invited to join her in that desert. We are being invited to partner with her in that perseverant search for water, its preservation, its cultivation into the sacred promise of something more. Like Hajar to Sarah, we all hold an invitation to collectively imagine in this moment. We are being called to challenge and grow beyond what we know. We are also being invited to remember the creativity and resilience within each and every one of us, and to know that it doesn't have to be like this. We are being invited with our broken hearts, with our questions, with our rage, to play our part in manifesting that promise of the divine, sacred, moral arc of the universe that bends towards justice with love. We are being called by our beloveds who are calling on us to not only recognize and decry environmental degradation, but acknowledge the ways in which our complacency has left our children and grandchildren to an uncertain future. We are being called to imagine new ways of being by actively obstructing pipelines, divesting from funds heavily rooted in oil production, prioritizing the ecological preservation that follows the lead of Indigenous climate activists. In these moments of reckoning, these are all calls for us to collectively nurture a sacred promise within all of us to create something new. There are calls to defund the police, to abolish immigration and customs enforcement, to abolish prisons, to end the slavery-preserving use of police officers and mass incarceration that we have in this country, and to imagine something new. There are calls to invest in practices and systems of restorative justice, to support community health and educational services that care for the whole person. These are all calls for us to collectively nurture a sacred promise for something new. Hajar didn't know what that promise of protection would look like when Ibrahim walked away. She didn't know where the water would be. And right now, I don't know about you, but I'm not sure where that water is either. But I have to believe, as a Unitarian Universalist, that there is a promise of love alive in our universe. And like Hajar, to see that promise come true, to see that protection come true, I have to take action rooted in a belief that something will be created out of my choice to believe. Whatever it might be that you have questions about, whatever it might be that you have worries about, drawing on these stories of Hajar, of Florence Reese in Kentucky, writing a song, of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, note that those are all women. There is a promise that each of them held onto, a belief that each of them held onto. And they persevered. They survived and they thrived, not just for themselves, but for every single one of us. And so today, we find ourselves in a uniquely challenging and isolating and frightening desert. And we are facing one of the most creative moments of all of our lives. If we are willing to open ourselves up to the truth that they hold and the possibilities that this moment invites. We can feel our faith's promise of water in this desert if we commit ourselves to creating it. May we be the ones who make it so.
The final hymn this morning is hymn 1018, entitled Come and Go With Me.
Our closing words come from the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, the Unitarian Universalist minister. In our time, hope means not running away from the icy, hard ground of suffering, violence, injustice, and defeat. It means savoring the sweetness of human love, lighting the Sabbath candles, smelling the spices, and opening our hearts to the sources of refreshment and grace that are given to us. Survival means reconstructing from the ruins a world of hospitality and peace. Thriving means living as one of those who, as Adrian Rich says, with no extraordinary power, reconstitutes the world.
We extinguish the chalice that it may glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this group. May it guide your way until we are together again. After the postlude, we invite you to go into the gallery mode and stay with us for a coffee hour. Bruce? Thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Reverend Ranwa, for those powerful and passionate words. We appreciate your being with us today. And now we can go into our coffee hour